Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second installment of our Cardinal Check-In, where we give you the opportunity to hear directly from athletic leadership on what is occurring within the athletic department at this moment. We are joined again today by Director of Athletics Tom Eisenhauer. Tom, thank you for being here.
Hi, Jalen. Thanks for having me again.
Absolutely. So last time we talked a lot about how we got to where we are. It was the start of the year. We were just wrapping up return to the activity. So it was a lot more about how decisions are made, scheduling, and things like that. So I want to talk a little bit more about where we are now. We're 4 to 5 weeks into the year. We are right in the middle of our first section of high-risk activity. So can you talk a little bit about just a reminder of what that is, who's in that period right now, who's upcoming, and maybe more importantly, how we got to this schedule, because not everyone's going right now. It's a staggered 3-week schedule. And what were the factors that went into determining who goes when?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been a very rewarding body of work to see our student athletes engage in practices. And so I'm happy that we're finally at this point. It's took a lot of planning by a lot of different people, but it really is rewarding and brings me a lot of joy to see our Cardinals on the field, on the court, even if it's with restrictions of masking and distancing. I mean, it's just great to see everybody back. So I love seeing that. I'm hopeful that we continue to do that. And I think because of the plans we have in place, we will be able to do so. I mentioned last time the testing that we're doing has been good. The outcomes have been good. We have very few positive cases coming out of the surveillance testing. The first time we did it, there were no positive tests. I think since we've started, there's only been one positive test coming from surveillance testing. And because of our Operation Safe Campus, we were able to identify that person quickly and begin our isolation strategies. And so we prevented any spread on campus, which is exactly what we wanted and is exactly what we predicted. We knew there'd be cases on campus, and our ability to continue to function was going to be dependent on, identifying and isolating. So I'm happy to say that we've done it. It's working well, and I'm confident it will continue to work. So back to your early question, we have both of our men's and women's soccer teams competing in their high-risk period right now, and the volleyball team. And so that's a 3-week period where we are allowing people to break down that 6-foot physical distancing window and to do some things without a mask on. Now, I say that we're still encouraging masks to be worn and distancing to be maintained whenever possible, but to actually allow those teams to conduct practices and activities that are authentic to their sport. And so that's been going extremely well. I'm excited to see them continue to do that and to grow and develop. The feedback from the coaches has been positive. They're excited about the teams that are on campus and certainly excited about their seniors, and then of course the new incoming students. In terms of determining who would go when, we tried to set out the schedule in such a way that would eliminate overlapping of facilities and also increase the presence of our sports medicine team. So in a normal fall, we don't have trainers at every single practices. We try to cover as much as we can, but it's, with the number of teams that we have, it's just not possible. But that being said, to do that in this time is really important. And so we've got those 3 teams going now. Then we'll begin baseball and softball. So part of the decision was not only overlapping facilities, but the trainers that were assigned to those sports, that they weren't covering 2 sports in a high-risk period at the same time. And staggering is also really important, so that in the case of if there were to be an outbreak, that we could try to, again, contain it, because we don't have all of our sports going full bore at the exact same time. Our goal is to preserve and maintain an on-campus in-person learning environment, which includes an outstanding student-athlete experience. But we've got to be here to be able to do that. So being a little conservative is a good thing at this point. If it keeps people here and gives us an opportunity for those teams to practice that aren't in their high-risk period yet, our teams that are in that period now know they have a responsibility to their other peer student athletes to give them the same chance that they have right now.
Definitely. And you touched a little bit on testing, and you gave a little bit of an update there. Can you walk us through what that process looks like? So if a student athlete tests positive, or even just is contacted by a contact tracer because they were an exposure and they need to quarantine, can you walk us through the steps of that process and the timeline? How realistically long does it take to go from that notification to back to team activities? I know the student health center is involved in a lot of that and things like that.
Yeah, and it's, it all depends on whether the person tested positive or whether the person is a contact. So if they're a contact, that means they don't actually have a positive test, but through our contact tracing, we have reason to believe that they were exposed to this person. And for this age group, we know that most carriers are asymptomatic, but even people who are asymptomatic are capable of shedding the virus at kind of an alarming rate. And so, again, if you don't know you have it, you could easily be spreading it, which is why the distancing and masking is so important. So we do our surveillance testing on a Monday morning. We will have those tests packaged, and they actually are FedEx Express to the laboratory in Lenexa, Kansas. It's CRL Laboratories who begins evaluating those tests. And typically we begin getting results as early as the next day. So for example, the ones that were conducted last week, there were 64 done on a Monday morning. And then by the middle of the week, we had 59 of those tests already back. So the turnaround has been really, really good, and I'm very pleased with that. So once we identify that someone is positive, our contact tracing team, which is through a group called Rapid Trace, begins that process. And then on campus, we have a team called the mobilization team, and it's an interdepartmental team, cross-departmental team, where we then move in quickly to identify where that student was. Do they need to be relocated? What spaces need to be cleaned? What are all the effects that are going to have? So communicating with faculty members about whether or not the student is going to be in class. And of course, this is all done protecting and maintaining confidentiality. So, but that process goes pretty quickly. Obviously, it's dependent upon a student being willing to engage with the contact tracers. So responding to text messages and phone calls. And up to this point, they have been really cooperative. And so again, that's one of those things contributing to the success of having such a low number of cases on campus this far into the semester. But very quickly, if it's a positive case, we can isolate that person, within, I'd say within 30 minutes to an hour of knowing that person was positive. And then for the contacts, we've been able to identify that again, then within 24 hours or less, knowing who those people are and then taking necessary steps to quarantine them. And that is important to know the difference between an isolation and a quarantine. An isolation is for someone who has tested positive. Quarantine is someone who has not tested positive. If it's a quarantine, they need to maintain and stay in quarantine for 14 days. We do test them again on day 11 before they can leave quarantine. And so that just helps us identify that before we're releasing out of them that they don't have the virus. And then obviously if it's a positive case, it depends on when the positive test was taken, how many days, where that counts into it. And we follow CDC guidelines and the guidance of Liberty Hospital for that.
Great, and thank you for that clarification. We know we don't have official schedules from the GLVC yet, but you did have recently the fall business meeting. You have any updates on when we might expect those schedules?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is the fun stuff, right? I mean, planning for COVID and making all the plans to not play is not the fun things. Getting to the point where we're now planning on having games and having contests, even if they look different, is really exciting. So several sets of schedules for this fall sports and winter sports went to the Board of Governors of the Great Lakes Valley Conference, and that consists of the athletic directors, the senior women administrators, and the faculty athletic representatives. Most of those schedules were at least gained initial approval, and then will be forwarded to the President's Council for ratification. So I anticipate that by the middle of October, we'll know what those schedules look like, and we'll begin to communicate those out publicly as soon as we can. Obviously, there's a lot of planning that we'll need to go in for our teams on the road and visiting teams coming here, but we also want to make sure that we're making preparations for hopefully to have spectators at our contests. Now it will be reduced and it will be limited because we are committed to following the recovery plan of Clay County. So we're gonna follow that, and then also be mindful of our Operation Safe Campus. And as I mentioned before, continuing to do the things that have kept the cases low is really important. So we'll continue to do those at the level that we can. Going back to testing, we fully expect to be testing at a higher level once all of our sports are in season, and which again helps us identify and isolate when we do have positive cases on campus.
Definitely. And you touched a little bit on it on home events. We actually do have a couple of home events coming up soon with swimming. We are getting ready to release some of those standards and protocols for spectators and our student athletes and things like that. Can you give us a little insight on, you said we were hoping for spectators or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really sport specific because not all of our venues have the same seating capacity, and there's differences between indoor and outdoors. What we can do in Green Stadium, clearly we can have more people in there. Now, the trade-off is that those teams tend to be larger when you're talking about football and soccer and track and field. And so, and then baseball and softball have much smaller seating areas. And in the Mabee Center, that houses not only basketball and volley, but also our swim meets. And so we're doing a very thorough analysis. We did some of this work early on, but now that we're much closer to it, is revisiting what those capacities are and determining what seating that we have and our ability to maintain distancing. And then we want to provide each one of our student athletes an opportunity to have guests. For most of them, that may be their parents, but we also recognize that student athletes, they may not have parents in town that can come to their games, or possibly if they're an international student, they may have other people here that have been really special to them in their journey, and they'd like them to be able to come to the games. And so we want to give student athletes the flexibility to determine who those approved guests will be. But then we also want to make sure that we're opening up the facility to current students, faculty, and staff, and members of the Jewel community. And these are people we know that are abiding by Operation Safe Campus. So to open the doors to the level that we can, we'd like to do. Now, again, those may be limited just because of the space we have available, but that's all stuff that is underway, and we'll hope to release that once we have the schedules released as well.
Well, Tom, we appreciate you taking just a few minutes out of your day to sit down and talk a little scheduling and home events with us. We'll catch up with you in just a few weeks.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jaylyn. And I think the last thing that I would include is for those that can't attend our games in person, tune in on the Great Lakes Valley Sports Network. The GLVCSN is an awesome way to watch all of our games, our contests, and you can download the app on your phone, whether it's Android or iPhone, and there's also the OTT apps on Huku and Apple TV. And so, I mean, even when I can't be at all the games, or maybe I'm at one game, I'll tune in and see what our teams on the road are doing. So if you haven't downloaded that, please check it out. It's a great way to keep up on Jewel athletics.
Definitely. I do the same thing whenever we're on the road. Jewel Swimming will actually open up the season for us on October 9th with their first home contest that will be broadcasted on the GLVC Sports Network at glvcsn.com/Jewel.